The Silver Claw clearing glowed under the full moon, silver light spilling through the trees like liquid magic. The pack was gathered in silence, each wolf bowing their head to the goddess above. Everyone was reverent, everyone except the tiny pup trying his best to stand tall at the edge of the circle. "When I grow up, I'll be your mate." Lyra Moonbane blinked. The pup barely reached her knee, his fur dark as midnight, his amber eyes burning with unshakable certainty. He couldn't have been more than 5 moons old, but there he was, declaring his fate to the future Luna of Silver Claw. She smiled, half amused, half flustered. "Is that so?" He nodded, tail wagging. "You'll see. The moon goddess already decided." Lyra laughed, soft and warm. "Careful, little wolf. The goddess has a habit of taking promises seriously." From somewhere behind them, Elder Thane's voice drifted through the clearing, deep, knowing, and just a little foreboding. She remembers every vow spoken beneath her light. Kale only grinned wider, eyes fixed on Lyra. "Then I'll make sure she remembers mine forever." Lyra chuckled, brushing his fur with her hand before turning back toward the ritual fire. The moment felt harmless, sweet even, but as the moonlight shimmered across their joined shadows, something unseen shifted. The goddess was listening. Years later, that promise would return to her, not as a whisper, but a war cry. To support the tale of Lyra and Kyle reach more moonlit hearts as it unfolds, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps. The clearing was still humming with the last song of the moon when Lyra found the little pup again. The others had gone, their paw prints already fading in the dew. Only Kyle lingered, nose buried in the damp grass, chasing fireflies with the single-minded joy only the young possess. "You should be in your den," she called softly, her voice carried across the clearing like the breeze itself, gentle but commanding. Kyle froze, tail giving an uncertain wag. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "The moon's too loud." Lyra smiled despite herself. "The moon doesn't speak, little wolf." He tilted his head. "Then who told me you were sad?" That stopped her for a moment. She knelt, brushing a hand over his dark fur. "You dream too deeply for your age," she murmured. "One day it'll make you a fine alpha. For now, it only keeps you awake." He leaned into her touch with a quiet sigh, eyes half closing. "My sister says dreams are how the goddess teaches." "Your sister is wise," Lyra said. "Listen to her. And remember, sometimes the goddess teaches through silence too." They sat that way for a while, moonlight pooling around them, the forest alive with the distant rustle of wings. The Silver Claw lands had always felt safe beneath the goddess's gaze, but tonight there was a charge in the air, a trembling just beneath the surface. Lyra could feel it in her bones, as if something unseen was shifting in the weave of destiny. A soft crunch of gravel drew her attention. Elder Thane stepped from the shadows, his white fur catching the light, eyes glinting like cold stars. He moved with the weight of centuries, the scent of herbs and smoke clinging to his cloak. "Luna," he greeted, voice gravel and wind. "You linger." "I was only making sure the pup found his way home." Kyle straightened at the sound of the elder's voice, torn between awe and defiance. "I'm not a pup," he said quickly. "I'll be alpha one day." Thane's lips twitched. "So I hear. Ambition suits the DARKFANG line, though it often burns too hot." Lyra felt a flicker of unease. "You sound like you've seen something." The elder's gaze drifted upward, toward the pulsing glow of the moon. "Prophecies are never kind, child. The goddess listens when innocence speaks. Words born beneath her light have teeth." Kyle blinked, confused. "I only said I'd be her mate." Thane crouched to meet his eyes. "Then may you grow wise enough to understand what such promises cost." Lyra frowned. "He's only a child." "All fates begin with children," Thane replied, rising again. Be wary of laughter in sacred places, Luna. The goddess keeps her own counsel. The elder turned and melted back into the trees, leaving silence in his wake. Kyle watched him go, then looked up at Lyra. Did I do something bad? She hesitated, unsure how to answer. The night air pressed close around them, thick with the scent of pine and something sharper. Fear, maybe, or knowing. Finally, she smiled and ruffled his ears. No, Kyle, you just made a promise under the moon. Sometimes that's enough to make the world listen. He grinned again, reassured, and trotted toward the edge of the clearing. Halfway there he stopped, glancing back over his shoulder. You'll remember me, right? Lyra's heart softened. Always. He vanished into the trees, his small form swallowed by the silver mist. For a long while she stood there alone, listening to the echo of his pause, Tep's fade. The moon hung heavy above her, luminous and watching. When she finally turned to leave, a streak of cloud crossed its face. The light dimmed just for an instant, and she thought she heard a whisper carried on the wind, soft, almost tender, yet threaded with something ancient. The bond is made. She spun around, but no one was there. The forest held its breath. The seasons turned, the Silverclaw pack thrived under her father's rule, and the DARKFANGs kept to the northern woods. Lyra tried not to think about the boy with the two bright eyes and the promise that clung to her like a forgotten song. Yet every full moon she caught herself searching the crowd, half expecting him to appear again. Elder Thane would sometimes find her in those moments, gazing skyward. He never scolded her, only watched with that patient sorrow he wore like a cloak. Once, when she asked what he had meant that night, he said, "The goddess balances light and shadow, child. When she blesses one heart, she tests another." Lyra didn't understand then. She did, years later, when the smoke rose from the northern hills and word spread that the DARKFANGs had fallen. "Betrayal," the whispers said. "Blood feud," the elders muttered. The Silverclaws held their borders, but Lyra felt the fracture deep inside her chest. Kyle's pack gone, his name unspoken. That night she dreamed of the clearing, the moon burning crimson, the goddess weeping silver tears. She woke with the echo of his voice in her ears. "You'll remember me, right?" And she had. Gods help her. She always had. The years that followed shaped her into the Luna the pack needed. Graceful, just, but tempered by loss. Her laughter came less easily, though the young wolves still sought her for guidance. The moonlight that once felt warm now carried a chill, as if waiting. Every prophecy, Thane once told her, is a door. Some you open, others burst through on their own. The night the howls returned from the north, Lyra knew which kind hers would be. The air split with a sound both familiar and terrible, a chorus of DARKFANG voices rising like thunder across the valley. The past she'd tried to bury came racing down the mountainside, carried on the wind and wrapped in power. Kyle had come home, and the promise made beneath the goddess's light was no longer a memory whispered by children, it was a summons. Years later, that promise would return to her, not as a whisper, but a war cry. The moon was half shrouded in cloud the night the peace between Silverclaw and DARKFANG finally broke. Smoke rolled through the valley like a wounded beast, choking the air with the scent of burning pine. Wolves ran in every direction, some with fangs bared, others dragging the wounded toward safety. The harmony of the two packs, bound for generations under the moon goddess's eye, shattered in a single heartbeat. Lyra heard the first howl before dawn. By the time she reached the ridge, flames already licked the tree line, turning the forest into a flickering sea of orange. Below, shadows clashed, wolves tearing through smoke, shapes of friend and foe indistinguishable. Her father's warriors were shouting orders, rallying the Silverclaws to defend their borders. Among the chaos, she caught sight of Elder Thane, his white fur streaked with ash, trying to separate those still willing to listen from those already lost to rage. And then she saw him. Kyle. He was older now, still young, but grown enough to fight. His father, Alpha Corin DARKFANG, towered beside him, defending their retreat against the Silverclaw guards. Corin's growl echoed across the clearing, desperate and commanding. "Hold the line! The goddess witnesses us!" Lyra started down the hill before anyone could stop her. The air stung her lungs. She could barely see through the smoke. She stumbled into the clearing just as a Silverclaw warrior lunged for Corin's flank. Kyle intercepted the blow, his smaller body slamming into the attacker with feral strength. The two crashed into the dirt, rolling through embers, and Kyle came up with a snarl that didn't belong on a boy's face. "Stop!" Lyra cried. Her voice cut through the din like lightning, freezing every wolf within earshot. "Enough!" Corin's golden eyes flicked toward her, weary but proud. "Luna," he rasped, "you shouldn't be here." "I came to stop this madness," she said. "None of this was meant to happen." Before he could answer, another voice rose behind her, deep, cold, carrying the authority of command. "You bring shame to the Silverclaw name, Lyra." Her father stepped from the smoke, flanked by guards, his silver coat streaked with soot. His gaze swept over the field, pausing on the wounded bodies strewn between them. "They crossed our border," he said, his tone hard as stone. "The DARKFANG spilled Silverclaw blood." Corin's jaw clenched. "We came to parley, not to fight." "Your hunters struck first." "Lies," one of the guards spat. Lyra looked between them, heart pounding. "Father, please, Elder Thane can—" But Thane was not beside her anymore. Somewhere in the confusion he had vanished, perhaps trying to halt the fighting elsewhere. Without his counsel, reason was already slipping through their claws. Her father raised his head to the moon, the words of judgment forming on his lips. "For the death of my warriors, for betrayal against the oath of peace, I declare the DARKFANG pack exiled from Silverclaw lands." Kale stiffened. "No!" He turned to Lyra, desperate. "Tell him it isn't true. We didn't—" But her father wasn't listening. He motioned to his guards. "Drive them beyond the ridge. If they return, they die." Corin met Lyra's gaze, something like understanding passing between them. "Do not mourn us, child," he said quietly. "Some promises must be broken so that others may live." Then, before he could retreat, an arrow hissed from the darkness. It struck Corin clean through the chest. For a moment he stood tall, eyes wide with disbelief, and then the great Alpha crumpled at his son's feet. Kyle screamed. The sound was raw, inhuman. He dropped to his knees, hands trembling over his father's body, and the fury that poured out of him seemed to shake the earth itself. A ripple of energy, dark, wild, primal, flashed in his eyes. Even the fire seemed to bow away from it. Lyra ran to him, but a Silverclaw soldier caught her by the arm. "Don't," he warned. "He's one breath from turning." "I don't care," she snapped, wrenching free. She knelt beside Kale, her hand hovering over his shoulder. His breathing was ragged, his gaze fixed on the arrow. "They'll pay," he whispered. "Every last one." "Kyle, please." He looked at her then, really looked, and for an instant she saw the boy who had once promised to make her laugh beneath the moon. His voice broke. "Tell her. Tell the goddess. I kept my vow." Before she could speak, the DARKFANG survivors pulled him away. They gathered Corin's body, lifting it with a reverence that made her chest ache. Lyra's father said nothing. He simply watched, eyes like steel, as the exiled wolves vanished into the smoke. When silence finally returned, it was heavy and cold. Lyra knelt where Kyle had fallen, fingers brushing through the scorched earth. The blood on her hands wasn't hers, but it clung to her all the same. Somewhere above, the moon slipped free of the clouds, pale and merciless. Elder Thane returned at dawn. His eyes found the burned clearing, the bodies, the hollow stare of the young Luna. "It is done then," he said. She rose slowly. "He's gone." The elder nodded. As the goddess decreed, light cannot exist without shadow. Lyra turned toward him, her voice trembling. "You knew this would happen. I knew the bond you share would demand a price. The goddess marks her chosen in ways mortals cannot understand." He looked to the sky, where the sun was struggling to rise over the smoke. "Pray that exile is punishment enough." She didn't pray. She couldn't. All she could see was Kael's face, the wild grief in his eyes, the promise beneath the pain. By nightfall, the Silverclaws buried their dead. Songs of mourning carried through the trees, rising and falling like waves. Lyra sang with them, though every word tasted of ash. When the final note faded, she stood alone by the riverbank. The water ran red in the fading light. Across the valley, far beyond their borders, another howl answered her song. It was low and fierce, filled with sorrow that cut to the bone. Kael DARKFANG had survived. Lyra closed her eyes. She didn't know whether to be relieved or afraid. The next morning, Elder Thane found her standing where she had been all night, watching the sun climb over the ridges. "You feel it too," he said quietly. "The bond still lives." She didn't answer. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke from the north, the mark of exile. Thane placed a hand on her shoulder. "One day, child, that scent will return to these woods, and when it does, the moon will demand what it is owed." Lyra watched the horizon where the light met shadow. The forest seemed endless, and somewhere within it a boy had become something else, something forged in grief and fire. Her heart ached for him, and for the promise they could no longer claim. The river whispered against the stones, steady and unfeeling, carrying the ashes of the fallen away. She lifted her eyes to the sky. "Moon goddess," she whispered, "if you truly listen, remember this. Let his anger fade before it finds us again." But even as she spoke, a sliver of silver light rippled across the clouds, and she knew the goddess had already heard. Some promises, once spoken beneath her light, never die. The first warning came on the wind. A howl, long, low, and threaded with power, rolled across the Silverclaw Valley just before dawn, scattering the mist and silencing the birds. It was not the voice of a stranger. It was the sound of a storm remembering its name. The wolves of Silverclaw lifted their heads, uneasy, their hackles prickling. Even the elders paused mid-prayer, the moonstone altar flickering under the sudden gust. Lyra heard it from her balcony. The sound clawed at her chest, familiar as her own heartbeat. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. The air was cool, the valley quiet, except for that single echo that seemed to stretch across 20 years. She had always known this day would come. Elder Thane's prophecy had hung over her like a shadow. But knowing did nothing to dull the ache of it. When the howl faded, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Her brother Rowan appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "You heard it," she nodded. "It's him." Rowan didn't bother pretending ignorance. He'd seen the same restlessness in the forest that she had, the sudden disappearance of scouts along the northern ridge, the uneasy stir of the goddess's power in the moonlight. "The DARKFANGs," he said. "They're back." Lyra turned from the balcony, the silver of her ceremonial cloak catching the first hint of dawn. "How many?" "Too many." Rowan hesitated. "And they move with discipline. This isn't a raid. It's a return." The word made her stomach twist. She remembered Kael's eyes the last time she'd seen them, bright with grief, wild with loss. She remembered how the moonlight had turned red the night of his exile. She had prayed that time would soften him, that somewhere in the wilderness he had found peace, but peace was not what howled through the valley this morning. By midday, scouts confirmed what everyone feared. The DARKFANG banner, a crescent claw slashed through with black, flew high over the ridge. The exiles had become an army. In the council chamber, the air was thick with tension. Elders murmured, warriors argued, and the sound of fists against the table echoed like thunder. Lyra sat at the head, calm but cold, her hands clasped to keep them from trembling. 20 years, Elder Thane said softly from his place by the fire. His fur was white as bone now, his eyes duller but no less sharp. The goddess measures her cycles in more than moons, child. The time of reckoning has come. Rowan slammed his fist against the wood. Reckoning? You mean vengeance? We should strike first, drive them back before they reach our borders. Thane's gaze flicked to him. Strike first, and you'll finish what your father began. Do you wish to repeat his sins? Rowan stiffened. I protect my pack, my family. Lyra rose. That's enough. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the clamor. The room fell silent. She looked at Thane. You've seen this coming. Tell us what you haven't said. The elder sighed, a sound like old leaves stirring. The prophecy bound 2 souls beneath the goddess's light. One of shadow, one of silver. When the bond ripens, the moon will demand her due. If they unite, the curse ends. If they resist, the valley will drown in blood. A shiver ran through the chamber. Rowan turned toward her, his voice low but trembling with fury. You think that monster still cares about prophecy? He's here for revenge, Lyra, for blood. Lyra didn't answer. She stared into the flames instead, watching the embers crackle and curl into ash. Somewhere beyond the ridge, she could feel Kael's presence. Not as a memory, but as a pull, a gravity she couldn't fight. That night, Silverclaw prepared for war. Fires burned along the perimeter. Guards took their stations on the outer cliffs. Lyra walked alone through the clearing where she had once stood as a girl, where a small pup had looked up at her and sworn he'd be her mate. The same moon hung above, cold and patient. She was no longer the girl who laughed at childish vows. The years had carved her into steel, but even steel remembers the fire that forged it. A rustle stirred behind her. She turned, and for a heartbeat, her breath caught. Kael stood just beyond the tree line. He was not the boy she remembered. The years had turned him into something far more dangerous. Tall, broad-shouldered, his black hair pulled back, his eyes a molten amber that glowed faintly in the dark. The air around him carried the scent of rain and iron, wild and sharp. Behind him, the shadows moved, wolves, silent and waiting. Lyra, he said. Her name sounded different in his voice, older, heavier. She forced herself to stand her ground. You shouldn't be here. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate, like a predator circling prey it didn't wish to harm. And yet here I am. His gaze swept over her, unreadable. You've grown. So have you. For a moment, the world felt suspended between them. The air hummed with something ancient, not hostility, not peace, but the weight of an unfinished promise. Kael's eyes softened, just for an instant. I told you the moon goddess would remember. She remembers, Lyra said, but she doesn't forgive. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. Then neither do I. Lightning flashed far off in the mountains, a silent storm gathering above them. Lyra felt the pulse of his power, not the raw, reckless energy of youth, but the steady, controlled might of an alpha who had learned to command fear itself. What do you want, Kael? What I was promised, he said simply, and what was taken from me. The forest around them shifted, his wolves advancing a step, their eyes glinting like scattered stars. From the walls of Silverclaw, horns began to sound. Lyra's heart pounded. If you've come to fight, you'll find no victory here. He tilted his head. If I'd come to fight, you'd already know it. Then he turned slightly, calling something low to his pack in a tongue she didn't recognize. The wolves melted back into the mist. their forms dissolving until only Kyle remained. "I didn't come to start a war, Lyra," he said. "Not yet. I came to remind you that the past doesn't stay buried." She took a step toward him before she could stop herself. "What are you planning?" His eyes flickered. Pain, pride, hunger. "You'll see soon enough." He turned to leave, but she called after him, her voice breaking. "Kyle." He paused. The wind carried the scent of her, moonlight and winter roses, and something in his shoulders softened. "You could end this," she said. "Whatever vengeance drives you, it doesn't have to define you." He looked back once, the faintest smile ghosting across his lips. "And what would you have me be, Lyra? The boy you pitied under the moon? He died with my father." And then he was gone, swallowed by the forest as silently as he had come. Lyra stood alone beneath the pale sky, her pulse a drumbeat of memory and dread. The clearing felt smaller now, haunted by ghosts and promises that refused to fade. She didn't notice Elder Thane watching from the ridge until he spoke. "The shadow has returned," he said softly, "and with it, the choice." Lyra turned toward him, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "Then may the goddess grant me the strength to face it." Thane's gaze lingered on the tree line where Kale had vanished. "Pray she grants you mercy instead." That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She stood by her window, the valley awash in silver light, and whispered into the quiet. "You kept your promise, Kyle." But she couldn't decide if that terrified her more than it comforted her. The moon hung low and red that night, a bruised eye staring down at the valley. The air tasted of rain and iron, and every wolf in Silverclaw felt the weight of it in their bones. Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the mist crawl between the trees like smoke. The forest had been restless since Kyle's return. Birds no longer sang at dawn, and the river, once silver and singing, ran quieter, darker, as if afraid of what it might reflect. Elder Thane had summoned her after sunset. His message had been simple, but heavy enough to twist in her gut all evening. "It is time." When she finally entered his den, the air was thick with sage and moonstone dust. Candles lined the walls, their flames flickering blue and white, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. Thane sat cross-legged by the fire, his fur gleaming pale against the darkness. His eyes, still bright despite his years, lifted to her with that quiet gravity she'd learned to fear. "You felt it," he said. It wasn't a question. Lyra hesitated before answering. "The pack's on edge. The land hums. Even the pups are uneasy. It's as if the moon herself can't rest." He nodded. "She cannot. The prophecy is ripening." The words landed like stones. Lyra had known something was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like a door slamming shut. "I thought the goddess had given us time," she said. "Time was never mercy," Thane replied. He gestured for her to sit. "It was only preparation." She lowered herself to the furs across from him, her heart pounding. "Tell me the truth, Elder. All of it." For a moment, the only sound was the fire crackling between them. Then Thane drew a deep breath and began. "When the moon goddess first blessed our kind, she gave us the bond of mates. Two halves of one soul, meant to keep balance between light and shadow. But balance cannot exist without sacrifice. Once, long before even my ancestors, there was a Luna of Silverclaw and an Alpha of Darkfang who defied the goddess's design. They loved beyond the limits of fate. Their union broke the cycle, and the goddess, in grief and anger, cursed the bloodlines that bore their names." Lyra's throat tightened. "A curse?" Thane's eyes met hers. "When the heirs of those bloodlines find each other again, one will fall so the other may rise. The moon will weep blood until the debt is paid." The words chilled her to the bone. "You mean Kale and I?" The elder's silence was answer enough. Lyra rose abruptly, pacing before the fire. No, it can't be that simple. He's not the boy from my memories anymore. Whatever we were, it's gone. Is it? Thane's voice was soft but sharp as glass. Did you not feel it when you saw him? The pull that defies reason, the ache that does not fade? She stopped. The truth she didn't want to admit pulsed in her chest, hot and raw. I felt something, she whispered. Then the goddess has chosen, Thane said, and she will have her ending, one way or another. Lyra turned toward him, anger flashing through her fear. If this is destiny, then what good am I? What good are any of us if our lives are already written? Thane smiled sadly. The goddess writes in cycles, not chains. You may not change the prophecy, child, but you can decide how it fulfills itself. Light or blood, that choice remains yours. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. One landed on her wrist, burning briefly before dying out. She stared at the mark it left, a tiny circle of red against her skin. It pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat. Tell me what happens if I defy her, she said. The elder's expression turned grave. Defiance is what began the curse. It will end the same way. If you turn from it, the packs will suffer. The moon will demand another sacrifice. The last time it happened, rivers turned crimson for 7 nights. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley, low and distant. Lyra could almost imagine the DARKFANGs stirring in their camp beyond the ridge, Kyle standing at their head, eyes lifted toward the same storm. I saw him, she said quietly. He came to me, not to attack but to warn, or to remind me. Thane's gaze sharpened. Then he feels it too. The bond between you is awakening. That is why the goddess stirs. When the moon next reaches her zenith, the balance will demand resolution. Lyra looked down at her hands, the faint shimmer of moonlight catching her nails. They trembled despite her effort to still them. And if one must fall, she asked, how do I know which it will be? You don't, Thane said. That is the mercy of ignorance. The fire dimmed as if his words had stolen its warmth. Silence pressed between them until Lyra finally rose. When the moon weeps, she murmured, will she mourn us or the choice we make? Thane's eyes softened. Both, I think. She loves her children, even when they destroy each other. Lyra stepped into the cool night air. The forest was alive with whispers, the kind that lived just beyond hearing, rustling leaves that almost formed words, the murmur of unseen wings. The red moon hung swollen above the treetops, bathing everything in its unholy glow. She walked until the temple lights were behind her and the clearing stretched open before her. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke and something darker, wolf musk, familiar and electric. Her pulse quickened. Watching me again, she called softly. The shadows stirred. Kyle emerged from the trees, his cloak wet with dew, eyes bright as molten amber. You make it sound like I ever stopped. She should have turned him away. Instead, she found herself stepping closer. You shouldn't be here, Kyle. And yet, he smiled faintly, though it held no joy. Your elders' warnings reach even us. The prophecy's song grows louder. You feel it, don't you? Lyra swallowed hard. I feel danger. Danger? His gaze darkened. No, Lyra. This is what fate feels like when it comes to collect its debt. He took another step, and she could feel the heat radiating from him, the scent of rain clinging to his skin. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to narrow to the space between them. One breath, one choice, one impossible truth. If we're bound by this curse, she said, her voice barely a whisper, then tell me what you want from it. Kyle's eyes softened, just for a moment. To see if love can break what hate began, The wind stirred again, carrying the first drops of rain. Lyra turned her face upward, watching as they fell, red under the moonlight, as if the sky itself bled. Thane's voice echoed faintly in her mind. When the Luna and Alpha unite, one will fall, and the moon will weep blood. The prophecy was no longer a story whispered by elders. It had begun. The forest burned with silver light the night Kyle came to the border. Mist curled low across the ground, wrapping around his boots as he strode through the clearing where the scent of Silverclaw still lingered. The DARKFANG wolves waited behind him, restless shadows pacing in silence. Their alpha had given no orders yet, but his intent rolled off him like heat, undeniable, steady, and wild. Lyra felt him before she saw him. It wasn't scent or sound. It was something deeper, a tug under her ribs, the quiet pull of gravity that had lived in her since childhood. She found herself drawn toward the edge of the territory, her bare feet barely whispering against the grass. The moon lit her path, painting her in pale fire. Kyle stood waiting beneath an ancient oak. He didn't move when she appeared, only tilted his head slightly, as though memorizing her face all over again. The years had changed him, his shoulders broader, his stance sure, his eyes sharp as blades, but the way he looked at her hadn't softened. Lyra. Her name came out rough, dragged from somewhere deep. She tried to keep her tone steady, but her heartbeat betrayed her. You shouldn't be here, Kyle. His lips twitched. You've said that before. Because it's always true. He took a slow step closer, and her pulse jumped. And yet, you came. I came to make sure you didn't cross the border. You mean this border? His boot pressed into the silver line of ash that marked Silverclaw's claim. The ground shimmered faintly beneath his weight, the scent of char and magic curling upward. Seems like an easy thing to cross. Lyra's breath caught. Kyle, don't what? He said softly. Don't remind you that what lies between us isn't a border, but a bond. She forced herself to meet his gaze. That bond is cursed. Then let it curse me again, he murmured, stepping fully into Silverclaw territory. The air around them shifted. The moon dimmed, clouds curling over its face as if to hide what it shouldn't see. Lyra could smell the smoke of his pack on him, the faint metallic tang of blood, and beneath it all, the same wild, untamed scent that had haunted her dreams for 2 decades. You're reckless, she whispered. The council will see this as an act of war. Kyle smiled faintly. Then let them. I didn't come to wage war, Lyra. I came to claim what was promised. Her throat tightened. You think I'm yours to claim? He looked at her then, really looked, the heat in his gaze almost painful. You made me a vow once, under this same moon. I was a child. You were the only truth I ever knew. His words struck her like a blow. She wanted to deny it, to throw his past back at him, but all she could do was stand there, caught between anger and the ache she'd never learned to silence. Whatever we were, she said finally, it died the night my father banished you. Then I must have carried its ghost with me all these years. He took another step, close enough now that she could feel his breath. Because it never left me. She should have backed away. She should have remembered the prophecy, the danger, the blood that still stained their history. Instead, her body betrayed her, her hand lifted as if on instinct, brushing against the rough leather of his chest guard. The warmth of him bled through the barrier, steady and alive. The world went still. For a heartbeat, she could almost believe the goddess had turned her gaze elsewhere. Then a voice shattered the quiet. Step away from her! Rowan burst from the trees, blade drawn, eyes blazing with fury. A dozen Silverclaw warriors followed, forming a half-circle behind him. The tension in the air cracked like lightning. Kyle didn't move. Still protecting her, I see, he said, his tone almost amused. Still threatening her, I see, Rowan snapped. Leave our lands before I make sure you don't walk out. Lyra stepped between them, palms raised. "Rowan, stop. This isn't what it looks like." Her brother's eyes flicked toward her. "Isn't it? The alpha of the DARKFANG pack crosses into our territory and speaks of claiming you. What am I supposed to think?" Kael's gaze turned to him, the faintest glimmer of challenge sparking there. "Think what you like. I'm not here for your permission." Rowan's grip tightened on his sword. "Then you'll leave me no choice." "Rowan!" Lyra's voice cut through the rising growl of both packs. "Enough!" She turned to Kael, her chest heaving. "If you care at all for what we once were, go! Don't do this!" Kael looked at her, every muscle in his body drawn tight. For a moment, the fire in him flickered into something else. Grief, longing, something too human to name. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. "For now," he said softly. He turned and whistled low. The DARKFANG wolves melted from the shadows, silent as smoke. Within seconds they were gone, swallowed by the night. Rowan lowered his blade only when the last trace of their scent faded. "He'll come again," he said, his voice cold. Lyra didn't answer. He turned to her, anger burning through his fear. "You think I don't see it? The way you look at him, the way you feel him. The pack feels it too. It's poison, Lyra. He's poison." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Maybe, but poison is only deadly if you swallow it." Rowan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're blind if you think he hasn't come to destroy you." She met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "I think he's already destroyed enough, and I think if we push him, we'll all pay the price." He hesitated, torn between duty and the memory of the sister he'd sworn to protect. "Elder Thane warned us," he said finally. "The prophecy isn't just about love, Lyra. It's about death. One will fall. Don't let it be you." Lyra watched him leave, the echo of his boots fading into the forest. The clearing was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. The air still hummed with Kael's presence, as if the world itself hadn't forgotten his touch. She lifted her eyes to the sky. The moon had returned, pale and watchful, her light spilling across the border where Kael had stood. The ash line still glowed faintly, a scar across the earth. Lyra knelt beside it, tracing the edge with her fingers. The warmth hadn't faded yet. "Moon goddess," she whispered, "if this is the fire you warned me of, teach me how to survive it." Somewhere far off, a howl rose, low and wild, but no longer filled with anger. This one sounded like a promise. Lyra closed her eyes, the sound wrapping around her like a memory. She didn't know if it was love or doom she heard in that call, only that it was hers. The dreams began with silver light and silence. At first, Lyra thought they were only fragments of memory, the kind that linger when the heart wants something the mind refuses to name. But as the nights deepened, the dreams grew sharper, louder, alive. The moon would fill the sky like a living eye, and a woman's voice would whisper her name, soft as smoke, fierce as command. Lyra. She would wake drenched in sweat, the taste of iron on her tongue, her heart beating to a rhythm that wasn't hers. Each time she closed her eyes again, she saw flashes, a wolf made of shadow, a woman draped in silver, and blood spilling onto sacred stone. The third night, she gave up pretending it was nothing. She went to Elder Thane before dawn, her cloak drawn tight against the chill. The old seer was already awake, tending to a bowl of moonlit water that shimmered like glass. When he looked up, there was no surprise in his eyes, only the kind of sorrow that comes from recognizing a prophecy fulfilled. "She's calling to you," he said before she spoke. "The moon goddess seldom visits in dreams unless the veil is thin." Lyra hesitated. "It feels more like a warning than a blessing." Thane stirred the water, the surface rippling into reflections of the night sky. "It is both. You seek answers about the curse, don't you?" Lyra nodded. "If I'm to face Kael, if I'm to survive this, I need to know why our fates were bound in the first place." Thane gestured to the bowl. Then look, Luna of Silverclaw. But know this, truth has its own price. She leaned over the basin, and the surface brightened until the light blinded her. When it dimmed again, she was no longer in Thane's den. The forest around her was older, untouched by time or claw. The trees glowed faintly, their leaves trembling with unseen magic. Ahead, a clearing opened, and in its center stood a stone altar carved with moon sigils. Beside it knelt a woman with hair as pale as starlight and eyes like mirrors. Lyra knew her instantly, though she had never seen her before. Selene. The goddess lifted her gaze, and the air trembled. You carry the weight of what was done in this place. Lyra swallowed. Why me? Because the sin was born from your blood. The goddess extended a hand, and light burst from her palm. The forest shifted, shadows reforming into images that moved and breathed. A memory, not her own. 2 wolves stood on the altar, one radiant white, the other dark as midnight. Around them, the world held its breath. The first Luna of Silverclaw, Selene said, was blessed by me, a creature of light meant to guide her people. But love is stronger than devotion. She fell for a spirit born of the void, a wolf forged from darkness and flame. Their bond defied the balance I set. In their union, they merged light and shadow, love and ruin. Lyra watched as the white wolf bowed her head to the dark one. For a heartbeat, they were perfect, a harmony of opposites. Then came the shattering. The moon cracked in the sky, spilling crimson light over the forest. The dark wolf's form twisted, devoured by the very shadow it was made of. The white wolf's cry echoed through the trees, a sound of endless grief. I tore them apart, Selene said quietly. Their love defied the order of the world. So I sealed them in the blood of their descendants, one line to carry the light, the other the dark. Silverclaw and DARKFANG, a bond never meant to reunite. Lyra's voice shook. Then Kale and I are the echo of that sin, the goddess finished. When your souls touched as children, the curse stirred again. Now the cycle must end. Lyra's throat tightened. And how? Selene's eyes softened, almost tender. Every union demands a sacrifice. Light cannot survive without shadow, but one must fade for the other to rise. If you love him, Luna, you will have to choose what dies, the curse or yourself. The light exploded around her, and Lyra gasped, stumbling backward into Thane's den. The bowls shattered at her feet, water spilling like mercury across the floor. The elder caught her by the shoulders. What did you see? She could barely speak. The goddess, the curse. It began with love. Ours isn't the first. Thane's face went pale. Then the end is near. Lyra pressed a trembling hand to her chest. She could still feel the echo of the dream, the goddess's voice, the sight of the dark wolf collapsing into dust. She thought of Kyle, of his eyes burning in the night, and felt that same terrible pull, the one that refused to let go, even when it should. Outside, the dawn was breaking, but the light seemed fragile, as if afraid to touch the world. Lyra stepped into the clearing, the cool air biting her skin. Every leaf, every sound seemed sharper now, as if the forest itself was listening. Her mind whirled with fragments. The first Luna, the dark spirit, Selene's warning. She could still see the blood moon burning behind her eyelids. She didn't hear Rowan until his voice cut through her thoughts. You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, she murmured. He frowned. Another dream? She hesitated, then nodded. It wasn't just a dream. It was truth. Rowan crossed his arms, concern flickering through his anger. And what truth did she give you this time? That the curse didn't start with Kyle or me. It started with love, and it can only end the same way. Rowan stared at her as if he hadn't heard her right. You're not saying Lyra, you can't believe that loving him could fix this. It'll destroy you. She looked up at the fading moon. Maybe destruction is the only way to free us. He grabbed her arm. Don't talk like that. You're the Luna. Your death would end us all. Lyra pulled away, her voice steady but soft. Then we need another way. The goddess spoke of balance. There has to be one path that doesn't demand blood. Rowan shook his head. Prophecies don't bend for hope. Maybe not, she said, eyes narrowing on the horizon where storm clouds gathered in dark streaks of silver and red. But neither does love. That night, when Lyra closed her eyes, she felt the bond flare again, like a heartbeat shared across distance. Somewhere, she knew Kyle was awake, staring at the same wounded moon. She felt his thoughts like a whisper pressed against her skin. You saw her too. Her breath caught. For a moment, the distance between them didn't exist. The goddess's curse wasn't just a story anymore. It lived, breathed, and waited. The shadows around her deepened, and from far beyond the trees came a soft, familiar voice. The moon remembers, child, and soon she will choose. The blood moon rose swollen and red, its light spilling like a wound across the mountains. The DARKFANG camp sat in eerie silence beneath it, fires burning low, wolves kneeling in a wide circle around a ring of ancient stones. The air hummed with old power, older even than the packs themselves. Tonight, the goddess would judge. Kyle stood at the center, stripped of armor, bare-chested beneath the cold breath of the night. The mark of his lineage, black and silver claws etched into his shoulder, seemed to glow in the crimson light. His heart beat steady, but every instinct in him screamed. The moon above was alive, pulsing like a living thing, its glow both beautiful and terrible. Across from him, Mira watched with her arms folded, her golden eyes hard but glistening with worry. You don't have to do this, she said quietly, though they both knew it was a lie. Kyle didn't look at her. If I don't, she'll take the choice from me. I need to prove to the goddess that I control the bond, not the other way around. Mira stepped closer, lowering her voice. And if you fail? He finally met her gaze. Then the curse decides for me. The drums began, low, primal, echoing through the clearing like the heartbeat of the earth. The elder shaman of the DARKFANG pack stepped forward, his fur braided with bones and feathers. Kale of DARKFANG, he intoned, the moon calls you to trial. 7 tests she demands, 7 gates between the man and the beast. Pass, and she may bless your claim. Fail, and you will be devoured by what you deny. Kale bowed his head. I'm ready. The first trial came as fire. Flames erupted around the star's circle, forming a ring that closed him off from his pack. Heat clawed at his skin, the scent of burning fur and smoke filling his lungs. A whisper rose from the fire itself, Celine's voice, lilting, merciless. You burn for power, for love, for vengeance. Show me what remains when I strip you bare. He clenched his fists and stepped forward, through the fire. The pain was real, searing, but he didn't flinch. The flames licked up his arms and left no scar. Only when he emerged on the other side did he realize he'd stopped breathing. The second trial was of blood. Shadows poured from the ground, taking the shape of wolves, his own packmates, their faces twisted in anguish. They circled him, snarling. He knew they weren't real, but that didn't stop the ache. Each shadow bore the eyes of those he had lost. His father, the warriors slain in exile, the pups that never grew to howl. Will you lead with mercy or with fear? Kyle dropped to one knee, bowing his head to them. I lead with both, he said, because mercy without strength is weakness, and strength without mercy is ruin. The shadows stilled, then faded into mist. The third trial came as a roar of wind and darkness. The goddess whispered again, The Alpha stands alone. Will you share your crown or drown in it. A vision surged through him, Lyra beside him, her eyes filled with light and defiance. Her voice echoed, though she wasn't truly there. You cannot rule if you can't bend. Kael sank to his knees, the ground trembling under his palms. I will bend only to her, he whispered. Thunder cracked above, and the trial passed. Mira watched from the edge of the clearing, her heart twisting. She knew the trials weren't meant to test his strength. They were meant to unmake him, to strip away everything that made him Kael. He had already passed 3. 4 more remained. The 4th trial came as silence. The world vanished. He stood in a void, surrounded by nothing but the echo of his own breath. No sound, no light, no scent, only emptiness, what remains when the world forgets your name. He waited, uncertain, then whispered, her memory. The silence shattered like glass, and he was back among the stones. The 5th trial was of heart. Selene appeared before him, not as a goddess of light, but as a woman cloaked in shadow. Her face shifted, becoming Lyra's, her voice soft and breaking. You claim love, she said, but do you love her for herself, or for how she fills your emptiness? Kael's chest ached. Both, he said honestly, because she is the only thing that makes the emptiness bearable. The goddess smiled sadly. Then you are honest, but honesty does not save you. The ground beneath him split open, swallowing him whole. He fell through darkness and fire until he landed in water cold enough to steal his breath. The 6th trial had begun. The river was black and endless, stretching toward a moon that kept drifting farther away the harder he swam. Exhaustion gnawed at him. His limbs felt like stone. Voices whispered from the depths, his father's, his sister's, Lyra's, calling him to sink. He closed his eyes and stopped fighting. The current took him, pulling him under. When he opened his eyes again, he wasn't drowning. He was floating, the moon hovering close enough to touch. To surrender is not to fail, the goddess murmured. Remember that. He reached for the light. When Kael woke, he was lying on the cold ground. The fires had gone out, replaced by moonlight. His body shook with exhaustion. Mira knelt beside him, tears streaking down her face. 6 trials, she said. 1 more. He forced a smile. You never doubted me. I always doubted, she whispered, because I know what comes next. The 7th trial was not of body or spirit. It was of soul. The goddess appeared again, but this time her voice filled the clearing. To lead is to choose. To love is to lose. Will you offer your heart or your pack? Only one will survive your rise. The wolves around him began to stir, their eyes glowing like embers. Mira's hand tightened on his arm. Kael, no, she pleaded. Don't let her make you choose. But he already knew his answer. My pack is my blood, he said, his voice trembling. But she is my soul. The goddess's laughter rolled through the night, both cruel and kind. Then you have chosen death, Alpha. Pain seared through him, bright and merciless. For a moment he thought his heart had stopped, but then the fire inside him roared back to life. Stronger, purer. The world snapped back into focus, and he was standing once more beneath the blood moon, breathing hard, his skin slick with sweat and ash. The shaman approached, awe in his eyes. He lives, he whispered. He has passed all 7. The DARKFANG wolves bowed their heads, a chorus of howls rising to the sky. Mira stared at him, her voice shaking. You did it. But Kael, your eyes. He blinked, confused. She stepped closer, gasping. His pupils had changed. No longer wolf gold, but burning crimson, reflecting the blood moon above. She touched his face gently, her tears falling. You won, brother. But tell me, is the man I knew still inside you? Kael didn't answer. He looked up at the moon, its red glow bathing him in holy fire. Somewhere far beyond the ridge, he felt Lyra stir, her heartbeat syncing with his like twin drums in the dark. The goddess's voice echoed faintly through the wind. The trials are complete. The bond is sealed. Now, let the prophecy claim its due. The blood moon rose for the second time that month, swollen and furious, bleeding across the sky like a wound that refused to close. The Silver Claw Valley trembled under its gaze. Every living creature felt it, the hum of power, the ache of something ancient waking. The air itself tasted like iron and rain. Lyra stood in the center of the clearing where it had all begun, the same ground where Kael had once made his childish vow. The grass here had never grown back right, scarred by the ashes of old fire and the weight of too many promises. Her cloak fluttered behind her, pale as moonlight, her silver eyes reflecting the crimson sky above. She knew what was coming. Elder Thane's warnings had echoed in her mind for nights now. When the blood moon rises, the goddess will demand her due. One must fall, and she knew, as surely as she knew her own name, that it had to be her. Behind her, Rowan pleaded with her again, his voice raw. "Don't do this, Lyra. There has to be another way." She didn't turn. The prophecy doesn't offer a choice. The curse was born from our bloodline, mine. If one must fall, let it be me. Rowan's hand tightened around his sword hilt. And what of him? You think Kael will let that happen? He'll tear the goddess herself apart before he lets you die. Lyra's lips trembled. Then let him hate me for it. Before Rowan could answer, a wind tore through the clearing, hot, wild, and heavy with the scent of storm and shadow. The trees bent as if bowing to something greater. Then Kael emerged from the darkness, his wolves fanning behind him like living shadows. His eyes glowed red, the mark of the trials still burning there. Every Silverclaw warrior raised their weapon, but Lyra lifted her hand. "Stand down!" Kael stopped a few paces from her. His gaze locked on hers, fierce and unyielding. "You called me here." "I didn't need to," she said softly. "You would have come anyway." He took another step forward. "The moon demands blood. You mean to give her yours?" Lyra's throat tightened. "It's the only way to end this." Kael shook his head slowly, fury simmering beneath his calm. "No. I've faced the trials. I've seen her face. I know what she wants. She doesn't want your death. Lyra, she wants balance." "She wants sacrifice," Lyra said. "The curse won't break without one." Kael's voice dropped to a growl. "Then she can have me." She flinched. "No." "Yes." His words were sharp, final. "You think I'll watch the goddess take you from me, after everything? I swore I would be your mate. I swore it under her light. If blood is the price, then let it be mine." He reached for her, but she stepped back, tears glimmering like frost on her lashes. "You don't understand. If you die, the curse will only return. The bloodline must end willingly. It has to be a gift, not a punishment." The moonlight deepened, shadows curling around their feet like living smoke. Above them, thunder growled low and restless. The goddess was listening. Kael moved closer until there was no space left between them. The heat of him pressed against her, steady and desperate. "You're not offering a gift," he said. "You're offering yourself to death. There's no honor in that." "There's peace," she whispered. "For who?" His voice broke. "You think I want peace without you in it?" The wind howled through the clearing, carrying the scent of rain and blood. Lyra's heart twisted painfully. "Kael!" He caught her face between his hands, his touch trembling. "You told me once the goddess hears every promise made beneath her light. Then hear mine, Lyra Moonbane." His voice dropped to a vow. "I will not let fate take you. Not this time." Before she could speak, the sky split open. Light poured down like fire, and Celine's voice filled the clearing, cold and infinite. So the Alpha defies me once more. Kyle turned toward the sky, his jaw tight. You call it defiance. I call it love. Love cannot change the order I set, the goddess said. One must fall for balance to return. Lyra stepped forward, her hair whipping in the wind. Then take me! The light shifted, burning brighter. You would offer your life to save his? Yes. Kyle's snarl tore through the night. No! He pulled her back, his arms locking around her. If she wants a soul, she can take mine. The ground trembled beneath them. The moon's light turned blinding, the goddess's power bearing down like a storm. Lyra struggled in his arms, shouting over the roar. You'll damn us both! Then so be it, he said, his forehead pressed to hers. If we burn together. Something cracked inside the air, like glass fracturing under too much strain. The light around them twisted, turning from crimson to silver. Lyra's power flared at the same time as Kyle's, their energies colliding in a blinding surge. Her silver aura met his shadowed one, the two merging, spiraling upward toward the moon like a vortex. The goddess's voice faltered, her fury bleeding into awe. What are you doing? Kyle's voice came low and steady. What you never could. He drew her closer, and their lips met, not as surrender, but as defiance. Their blood mingled where his hand brushed her cheek, their power entwined. The earth erupted beneath them, the sky shaking as the light around them exploded into brilliance. In that instant, light and shadow fused. The curse that had bound their ancestors broke with a sound like the world exhaling. The red hue drained from the moon, replaced by a soft silver glow. The storm stilled. The air smelled of rain, clean and new. When the light faded, Lyra and Kyle were kneeling in the grass, his hand still clasped over hers. The mark on his chest, once dark as coal, now shimmered silver. On her wrist, a matching sigil burned faintly black, warm against her skin. Two halves of the same whole. Celine's voice drifted through the quiet, no longer wrathful, but sorrowful. So it is done. The curse ends not through death, but through union. Kyle lifted his head, his voice hoarse. You wanted balance. You have it. The goddess said nothing more. The clouds parted, and the moonlight poured down, gentle and pure. Rowan stepped forward from the tree line, all written across his face. The silver claws and dark fangs stood side by side, silent as the tension that had haunted their bloodlines dissolved. Lyra looked at Kyle, her voice barely a whisper. We did it. He brushed his thumb across her cheek, a small, tired smile tugging at his lips. No, Luna, you did it. She leaned against him, exhaustion finally claiming her. What happens now? Kyle glanced up at the silver sky. Now the goddess watches, but she no longer commands. The night air cooled around them. The wolves began to howl, not in mourning, but in harmony, a song that rolled through the valley like dawn itself. For the first time in centuries, the moon shone white, and beneath it, the Alpha of shadows and the Luna of light knelt together, not as enemies, not as prophecy's pawns, but as one. The dawn after the blood moon was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm too great to name. The air still smelled faintly of rain and magic, but the heaviness that had haunted the valley for centuries was gone. The trees stood taller, the river ran clear again, and the earth itself seemed to breathe a long, trembling sigh of relief. Lyra woke to the sound of wind through the grass, her body aching but alive. The sky was soft blue now, washed clean of crimson, and sunlight filtered gently through the leaves. She could still feel the remnants of Kyle's warmth beside her, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her palm, the way his breath had steadied hers as they knelt beneath the moonlight. The bond between them was no longer a curse or a prophecy. It was something real, something chosen. Kyle stirred before she spoke, opening his eyes slowly. The red glow that had haunted them since the trials was gone, replaced by their original gold, bright and steady as firelight. When he looked at her, there was no shadow of the goddess's mark left. Only him. "You're awake," she murmured, her voice a whisper in the stillness. He smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure I'd ever sleep again." They both laughed softly, and the sound felt strange, fragile, human. For so long, every moment had been sharpened by fear, by fate, by the weight of something older than them both. But now there was only this. Two people beneath a healing sky. The sound of footsteps broke their peace. Rowan approached slowly, his sword sheathed, his usual tension replaced by disbelief. Behind him came Mira, cautious but calm, her eyes darting between the two leaders who had once stood on opposite sides of a blood-soaked border. "It's over," Rowan said, as if testing the words. The fighting stopped before dawn. The goddess's storm vanished with the night. Mira added quietly, "The packs are waiting. They don't know what comes next." Lyra glanced at Kael. "Neither do we." He reached for her hand, his touch grounding. Then we decided together. When they stepped out of the clearing, every eye turned toward them. Silver Claw and DARKFANG wolves, once enemies divided by blood and superstition, stood side by side, watching in silence. Some bore wounds from the night before. Others still carried the marks of old hatred, but something had changed in them. The curse that had made them enemies was gone, and what lingered now was awe. Kael stopped at the edge of the hill overlooking the valley. His voice carried easily through the morning air. "The goddess's bond between our bloodlines has ended," he said. "The moon no longer demands our death. She asks only that we live as one." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, cautious, uncertain. Lyra stepped forward, her silver hair catching the sunlight. "The Silver Claws and the DARKFANGs have lost enough to prophecy. From this day on, there will be no more borders, no more oaths of vengeance. We will build something new, together." Rowan's hand brushed the hilt of his sword out of habit, but he nodded. "Then let it begin." For the first time in memory, both packs howled, not in defiance, not in grief, but in unison. The sound rolled across the valley, wild and beautiful, echoing through the mountains like an ancient song finally remembered. When the voices faded, Mira stepped forward and placed a small obsidian stone in Lyra's hand. "The mark of DARKFANG," she said. "If you're to be our Luna, then let our symbol rest beside yours." Lyra hesitated, then smiled. She lifted her moonstone pendant, the crest of Silver Claw, and pressed the two stones together. The magic between them flared, a brief flash of light that faded into one. Silver and black fused into a single sigil, the mark of unity. The crowd bowed their heads as the light spread, washing over them in waves. The faint scars of the curse, the shimmer of corruption that had haunted their blood, faded from every wolf's eyes. Children who had been born under the tainted moon lifted their heads for the first time and saw only light. Lyra turned to Kael. "It's done." He brushed his fingers over the pendant where it rested against her chest. "No, Luna, it's begun." She smiled softly. "Luna, you thought I'd ever call you anything else?" Her laughter broke through the hush, warm and alive. For a moment, it felt like the entire forest joined in, the branches swaying, the wind sighing through the grass. As the day stretched on, the packs began to move together, clearing the battlefield, tending to the wounded, sharing food and water for the first time in generations. Where there had once been fear, there was curiosity. Where there had been suspicion, there was cautious hope. When the sun began to set, Lyra and Kael walked to the ridge overlooking the valley. The moon was already rising again, no longer red but pale and calm, like a watchful mother's eye. They stood side by side, their shoulders brushing, their bond pulsing softly beneath their skin. She's still watching, Lyra said quietly. Kyle tilted his head toward the sky. Let her. Let her see what balance looks like. They watched in silence as the moon climbed higher, its light painting the world in silver. Somewhere below, Rowan and Mira led the combined packs in song, a hymn to both the goddess and the dawn. The words were old, but the meaning was new. A prayer, not for power or victory, but for peace. Lyra leaned into Kyle, her head resting against his shoulder. Do you think she's pleased? He looked down at her, his expression soft. I think she's tired of watching us suffer. And far above them, in the quiet between stars, the moon goddess Selene smiled. Her voice drifted down like the wind, a whisper heard only by the two who had broken her curse. At last, the moon finds balance. The words lingered, gentle and final. Lyra lifted her eyes, and for a moment she swore she saw a figure. Silver hair flowing like water, her face radiant with sorrow and pride, fade into the starlight. Kael took her hand, his thumb brushing against the mark on her wrist. No more destiny, he murmured. No more prophecy, she agreed. Only us. The moon rose higher, and the valley glowed beneath its light. Wolves howled again, but this time the sound wasn't filled with longing or pain. It was a song of life, of renewal. Lyra turned toward Kael, her voice low and sure. Then let's begin our reign, Alpha. He smiled, the kind of smile that held both promise and peace. Side by side, Luna. And as the first night of their new world unfolded, they stood together beneath the moon, no longer children of prophecy, no longer divided by blood or fate. Only two souls, equal and eternal, bound not by darkness or light, but by love that had finally taught the moon to shine without weeping. Thank you for listening. If you've journeyed with Lyra and Kael to this final moonrise, I'd love to know what you felt along the way.